Well, today we celebrate, as I mentioned before, the great solemnity of Pentecost, which represents really the end of the Easter season. 2 weeks following this, we celebrate the Holy Trinity, which happens always after the Easter season, and the week after that, Corpus Christi, and then we really get back into the regular schedule of ordinary time, beginning where we left off just before Lent. Pentecost, as most of you probably know, means literally 50 days. So it's been 50 days since we celebrated Easter, the resurrection of the Lord. It doesn't seem all that long ago, and in some ways it seems like a long time ago. We've had quite a roller coaster of weather in that time. And today celebrates the time when the fullness of the faith and the courage and really the revelation of the Paschal mystery, the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus, is given to the disciples in their fullness. So the disciples, we know the 12 apostles were there, and certainly Mary, their mother, but probably many other disciples were gathered in that upper room, but they were gathered there in fear. They were gathered there in fear. Why? Well, they had good reason. People were out to get them. These early Christians, the founders of the Way, were under great persecutions because they did not believe or wanted to deny the resurrection of Jesus. And they were going to be put in prison, in chains, or as some of the early martyrs, stoned to death because of what they were professing, following a new life and a narrative that Jesus had given them. Notice now the trajectory. As we go through the Easter season, we celebrated Jesus' death and resurrection. Last week we celebrated his ascension. This week we celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit. Now imagine, for a minute, that you're one of those disciples. You've seen Jesus' life, you've been following him, you've witnessed great miracles. You've come to disappointment probably on Good Friday a little bit because you thought he was going to be the one to restore Israel and redeem the world, but instead you see he dies on a cross. The next step is 50 days after the resurrection, he's appearing to his disciples. He's saying, listen, guess what? There is a new dimension of life open to you. You don't have to despair of anything in this life. Why? Because God has prepared a place for you that's out of this world in two different ways. It's heaven. And so after those appearances, during these 50 days, we come to the point of the ascension last week when Jesus suddenly is lifted out of their sight for the final time. And as Deacon Brian preached last week very well, he said, you would imagine that they would have been disappointed, that this person that they've followed, been disappointed in, and then had their hopes resurrected literally, would have been a little sad that he had departed their company. Luke, even in his gospel, points out at the end, during the period of the ascension, he says, then he, Jesus, led them out as far as Bethany, raised his hands, blessed them. As he was blessing them, he parted from them and was taken up to heaven. They did him homage, then returned to Jerusalem with great joy. And they were continually praising God in the temple. So why in the world would having the Jesus taken away give them great joy and give them over to endless praising in the temple? Unless they trusted in the promise that Jesus had told them before, that when he ascended to the Father, he would give them an advocate, who we also call the Paraclete, after he ascended in order to be with them. It was a new presence that Jesus was going to be with them, not in physical form, but in more of a spiritual form, in the form of the Holy Spirit. And we have to be careful. When we say Holy Spirit, we don't want to say what, we want to say who. Because the Holy Spirit is a person of the Trinity and wants to have a personal relationship with us. The Paraclete is a very specific term. In Greek law courts, the word Paraclete was a lawyer for the defense. In Greek law courts, you did not have a lawyer to defend you. You had to defend yourself with your own words. And so what a Paraclete would do is a Paraclete functions sort of as a lawyer, but rather than standing up for somebody for the defense, he would actually whisper in the words of the defendant and what they were to tell the judge in the case. So the lawyer, imagine today in today's law courts, the lawyer would whisper to the person, the defendant, and the defendant would have to tell the judge what the lawyer said. So that word paraclete has a very specific historical meaning, and it keeps its sense, especially when it comes to the gift of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the voice of God, the Father and the Son, whispering into our ear about what we should do, and oftentimes maybe what we shouldn't do. So I've traced this out. The point that I'm coming to is, where are you in your journey of faith? First of all, are you a disciple? Do you know who Jesus is? Alpha, that's been going on in the parish and around the diocese for some time, has been doing a great favor to introduce people to who Jesus is. Do you believe that he rose from the dead? That's the next step. Do you believe that there's a new dimension of life open to you that helps you overcome all of the particular struggles that happen in this life? Do you believe that he appeared to his apostles? Do you believe that the Spirit can give you life? Do you believe that Jesus ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father? His physical body, which no longer exists on earth in the fact of the empty tomb, do you believe that he's seated at the right hand of the Father, literally in physical form, in a new dimensional form, but waiting to intercede for you? Do you believe that he has sent his Holy Spirit today? And do you invite that Holy Spirit into your life in a very real way? So where are you on that journey? Where do you need to start? And maybe where do you need to keep going? It's clear that the apostles trusted that he would send this Holy Spirit, and which is why they went to the temple in joy. But there's one issue, friends. Today we find them in the gospel, even after witnessing Jesus' life, witnessing his resurrection, witnessing his ascension, trusting in the promise of the Holy Spirit. Where do they go to have joy and worship? They go to the temple. Today we find them in the gospel. Where are they? They're huddled in a room, still afraid. Despite all they had witnessed in their life, despite all of the favors that God had granted them in being with them, all the miracles they had witnessed, all the favors that he had done, even overcoming the great disappointment of Good Friday, they come to the resurrection, they witness him, they still see his miracles, he ascends into heaven, and they're in a room, afraid. Because there was one component that was still missing. The courage afforded them to the Holy Spirit. They say the longest distance is between the head and the heart. They knew in their mind everything they had witnessed externally, with their eyes, with their bodily senses, but there was one sense, the sixth sense, they say, that they had not yet tapped into. And that was the power and the courage of the Holy Spirit. And when they had it, the doors were opened. They went out proclaiming Christ without hesitation and without fear. The new dimension of life was opened up to them in the resurrection, and now they had the courage to actually proclaim it. And for the first time, we call this the birthday of the church. They were united in a common mission, not divided about who was to blame for the resurrection or who was to blame for the crucifixion or denying Jesus, but they were united by the gift of the Holy Spirit. The final point is this, friends. Every one of us knows that our culture has just become accustomed as Christians, especially us, to be intimidated by the culture. To be intimidated by media to deny what we know, what we've witnessed, to deny those experiences that we know and are sure of that we have had in our past of the Lord, and to keep our religion quiet. This is the very antithesis to what it means to inviting the Holy Spirit into our lives. And it's the reason why you wonder why society goes into chaotic modes. We have another shooting in Texas this last week. Where there is the spirit of division, there is the spirit of evil. Where is there the spirit of the Holy Spirit of God, there will always be unity. The last time you ate in a public restaurant with your family, did you make the sign of the cross? Did you pray before your meal? If you didn't, why? I'm not saying that to criticize. I'm saying that even as a priest, when I go into public, especially dressed as a priest, I sense that pressure of culture telling me you can't make that sign of the cross here. Religion belongs in the four walls of your church and not outside. And the longer we keep our faith hidden, as long as we keep the Holy Spirit concealed, as long as we don't want the Holy Spirit in control of our lives, as long as we want to grasp control, society will continue to spring out of control. And every one of us as individuals has to make the choice to invite the Holy Spirit into our lives, because the Holy Spirit only goes where the Holy Spirit is wanted. The Holy Spirit goes only where the Holy Spirit is wanted. Which is why St. Paul says very simply in Corinthians, no one can say Jesus Christ is Lord without the Holy Spirit. All right, let's try that. No one can say Jesus Christ is Lord without the Holy Spirit. So 1, 2, 3. Oh, sorry, no, just Jesus Christ is Lord. All right, let's try that. Jesus Christ is Lord. That's 4 words. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Jesus Christ is Lord. Did you notice how much freer you felt after you said it? Did some of you maybe notice a little hesitation before you said it? And when you overcame that little fear, suddenly afterwards you realized that you could do it? Well, you can do it, friends, and you should be. In your homes, in your families, in public, and never be afraid. And when you are, invite the Holy Spirit to overcome that fear and be brave soldiers for Christ.